Hello, or ahoy. How are you? Another dead soldier. So, you saw the title card. 1965 Corvair Corsa. So this particular Corvair has come into my possession, but it's actually been in my life in one way or another for probably the last 22, 23 years. When I first moved into this home, that car, which I'll show you here in a moment, actually belonged to my neighbor across the street, Bill Covell. I don't know if he was the original owner, but he was probably the second or the minimum the third. I think second, but I don't remember. But it lived across the street for many, many years. And then ultimately, about 10 years ago, my father purchased it from Bill, who passed. He died about 8 years or so ago. So Pop bought it from him, a year and a half before Bill got sick. I think Bill knew he was circling the drain and it was starting to get some items out of his life, if you will. Well, anyway, as most of you know, my father passed away about 3.5 years ago, and the Corvair went to live with my sister and her family, specifically her son Nathan. And now Nathan is gone off to college, or he's been at college for the last couple years or so, and as I understand it, he's going to be going to medical school, and my sister and brother-in-law, they're going to be moving back east. So the Corvair is now in my possession, and it needs a little TLC at the moment. It doesn't run worth a shit, which I will take care of. But I thought it would be interesting to kind of talk about Corvair itself, and then I'll show you Mavis, which is what I've decided to call her. We all know my Volkswagen Bug is Myrna, so the Corvair will be Mavis. And we'll do several Corsa Chronicles while I try to get her running. But what's interesting, the Corvair itself, the name, I believe, first appeared, well, probably a little bit before 1954, but it was part of the Motorama, the Corvette body prototype was called the Corvair at the GM Motorama exhibition, the traveling exhibition around the country. Here, take a look. Here's the Corvair as it was known in 1954. Right, now we all know that became the Corvette. Well, in 1960, when the Corvair was introduced, I believe Cor, and then the Air, Corvette, if you will, and then I think the Air, meaning air-cooled, because as many of you know, Corvairs are air-cooled. And Corsa is Italian, I think, for run or race. I'm not sure, I need to look that up. But anyway, so 1954, the name sort of first appears, and Corvair started its production in 1960, and it ran to 1969. And in that 10 years, they did about 1.9 million cars, which is pretty good. And then the Corvair died its death and was replaced by the Vega, of all things. So well done, GM. But Corvair, for its time, obviously, it's a large car by today's standards, but in 1960, it was considered a subcompact. And keep in mind that Chevy was very aware that old AMC, or actually Nash at that time, had the Rambler. The Japanese cars were starting to seep into America. Very small, very practical. I think Studebaker had the Lark about that time. So cars were starting to get smaller, and I think GM was very aware of that, and it needed to capture that audience. Now, there's a lot of technological advancements with Corvair: rear-engined, air-cooled, aluminum block. It had two iterations or two generations, 60 to 64, and then 65 to 69. And Ralph Nader, Unsafe at Any Speed, didn't do Corvair any favors. He wrote a scathing book that came out in 65 about how the Corvair was unsafe. And keep in mind, this is the era of the Volkswagen Beetle and stuff too. It's really gaining in popularity, and Chevy and I'm sure Ford, they all have to do something to combat this. The Mustang being one. Anyway, so first generation 60 to 64, second generation 65 to 69. Now they had the two-door coupe, four-door station wagon. They had a couple of vans, and I don't remember the model designations, like 500, 700. I think there was a passenger van and we'll call it a commercial van. And then they also had the truck, which had the folding, I'll call it the ramp side, the sides would fold down, like Volkswagen. I think Volkswagen had a version similar to that. Anyway, those sort of died a death in 65. And in 65, which is the Corvair that I now have, Corsa was the top of the line, the racehorse. Now, what's interesting, I did a little research on the car itself, and again, I'll show it to you here in just a moment. First thing I did was check the VIN, and sure as shit, it is a Corsa car, built in Los Angeles. I forget, I want to say it's one of 112,000 maybe that were built, and I could be off on that number. I don't remember now. But what's so strange is the Corsa, it should have a 140 horsepower engine, and it should have 4 single barrel carburetors. Now, this particular vehicle in my driveway has 2 single barrel carburetors. And at first I thought, well, okay, somebody, changed the intake manifolds, switched to 2 carburetors, because I can't imagine trying to balance 4 carburetors. Switched to 2, and that was that. And when it was in my father's possession, we drove it many times, and it ran like a top, no issues that I remember. It's a 4-speed. And then in my research, I learned that, well, Corvairs don't actually have intake manifolds. The carburetors bolt directly to the heads, which makes it a hell of a lot harder to just convert it over from 4 carbs to 2 carbs. Not impossible, but possible. Okay, and again, as I said, the serial number, the block is a Corsa block, the VIN, the car is a Corsa car. And inside the instrument cluster, it has the correct tach, the 6,000 tach, and a speedo. It has a fuel gauge and a temperature gauge, but it's missing the vacuum gauge and a clock. And you'll see here in a moment, the part that's so strange is that there's a delete. They're not missing. There's actually, if you buy even today, you buy a car that doesn't have all the features, normally there'd be a button there, and instead there's just a piece of plastic that sort of blends in, if you will. You know what I mean? Well, on this dash, there's 2 cones where there would normally be the clear cone, coming out. It's black at the bottom. I'll show you, which makes me think or consider, perhaps in 1965, was this car ordered with just the 2 carburetor setup, which would be on the 110 horsepower instead of 140. They're all the same block. I think just the piston size and probably the valves, a handful of different things give it a little bit more boost, if you will, because there's even a turbo version that was 180 horsepower, supposedly. So it's very, very curious. Which one is the reality? Is it possible that someone ordered it specifically that way? Not that it matters, but I'm fascinated by it. I lean more towards some consumer over the last 50 years changed the heads or something had happened, but that doesn't explain those deletes, unless I'm just being fooled. But anyway, here, take a look. Here, the car's missing a couple of things. There's some bottom, I think along the rockers, there should be some stainless steel, thin, narrow sort of striping just underneath the doors. That's missing on both sides. There are holes. On the rear quarter panel, there should be the Corsa C emblem. I'll get those replaced. I can't currently get the trunk open. And yes, I know to turn the key, that little extra, but there's a car cover in there. And my hunch is during us moving it around, because we had to push it into the driveway, perhaps that car cover has moved and it's blocking, allowing the latch to open up. But I believe if I pull out the headlights, I might be able to get in there with I don't know, some sort of tool. When we open it, I can pull it and fix it, if you will. But anyway, take a look here. Here's Mavis. 1965 Corvair Corsa. As I was saying earlier, most of the correct badging. You can see on the front quarter, Corsa's there, proper hubcaps. It appears to be missing the, I'll call it the lower rocker trim. There's holes there for it, I believe. Be a small piece of stainless or chrome. And then the C on the rear quarter is missing. I'll find and get those, though I haven't seen any holes. All in all, pretty straight. Let's take a quick look inside. So here's the gauge cluster, and you'll notice it's for the Corsa. But down below here, hopefully you can see it, those are deletes. It's not that the gauges are missing. They were never installed, which makes me wonder. There should be a clock and a vacuum gauge. I think the clock would have been where the fuel gauge is. I think the temperature gauge was there. Fuel would be down here on the left, and then the vacuum gauge would be on the right. But again, those are like factory deletes. So is it possible that this car was ordered from the factory or from the dealership with the two carburetors instead of 4? I don't know. Factory radio, everything else seems to be factory. It actually has air conditioning, I believe, installed at the factory. But you know, the other possibility was, as I was saying, that someone changed the 4 single barrel carbs over to the 2 single barrel carbs, you know, the last 50 years. But I'm inclined to say that's not true, because they would have the gauges. They might be disconnected, but they would exist. And again, it's dusty in there, but you know, that's a delete, man. Anyway. Right, isn't that dash? Isn't that peculiar? And maybe I'm full of shit, I don't know. But I thought we'd start a series, again, the Corsa Chronicles, much like the VW Bug Chronicles, when it took me 2 years to get Myrna running. This should go a lot faster, because I think I know what the problem is. This weekend, or when I get a chance, we'll start with, everybody seems to think it's carburation, which it probably is, but who knows? We'll start with the spark plugs. We've got points, potentially a fuel pump. Maybe if there's something wrong with the fuel pump, though I doubt it. I think it's probably just running really, really rich, because I've been told that it sort of runs fine. It's only when it's been running for a while. Hard to say, but we'll just sort of start at the beginning, and I'm going to bring you guys along, and hopefully you'll get a kick out of my foibles. Anyway, in this world, when you could be anything you want, you be kind, you be humble, you be forgiving, and we'll see you in chapter 2 when we get underneath the hood and try to solve this problem. Thanks for watching. Bye.